Hello.
All of you who are waiting, have no fear. We're just waiting for the room to populate. The quiet is intentional. Okay, so now I'm going to say that unfortunately, we only have 59 minutes and 15 seconds left. So we're going to get going. We have a lot to cover today. And as usual, it's a subject that I think will lend ourselves to more than an hour. So here we go. Welcome and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Danny Schultz. And on behalf of the Westchester Jewish Council and the organization Stand With Us, I'm honored to be introducing today's event, part of the WJC's successful monthly Israel Connection series. The WJC is an umbrella organization representing 135 plus Jewish groups, schools, and synagogues in Westchester, the 8th largest Jewish community in the United States, totaling over 150,000 citizens. Today's event is being sponsored by the WJC and Stand With Us. And with us today from Stand With Us, we have Avi Posnick, the Northeast Regional Director. Stand With Us is an organization dedicated to Israel education, fighting anti-Semitism and misinformation, particularly on college campuses, and taking on the BDS movement, the boycott, divestment, and sanction movement. I'm proud to be a board member of WJC and chair of our Israel Affairs Committee, so I am truly honored to be hosting our guest today. Today's talk is one that I didn't want to miss. We are joined by Hussein Abu Bakr Mansour, speaker and author of Minority of One. If you have not done so, I recommend you buy the book. And let me take a second before we jump into things just to give you a little bit of Hussein's bio. So Hussein has lived quite a life jammed into his, I believe, 32 years. He was born in Egypt in 1989 and eventually became an outspoken Egyptian political dissident. Hussein was raised in a conservative Muslim family, obsessed with his hatred of Jews in Israel, originally wanting to become a jihadist. In his teenage years, after questioning these attitudes, he decided to learn Hebrew. And that enabled him to see Jews, Israel, and Arab-Jewish relations in a very different light. While witnessing the creeping radicalization of society, he developed his own personal beliefs and opinions, resulting in clashes with Egyptian security agencies, as well as with his family. Hussein participated in the Egyptian Tahrir Square revolution in 2011 and was jailed and tortured for his activities. He eventually sought asylum in the United States in 2012. He arrived here and has since served as an assistant professor of Hebrew language at the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California. I can tell you that his miftah in Hebrew is excellent. Hussein became a US citizen in 2017, serves in the US Army Reserves, and is currently a public speaker, blogger, and advocate for peace and education. Oh, I'm exhausted. Okay, so Hussein, first of all, everyone here should congratulate you. I know you know the reason now, and it may just be a coincidence, but in reading your book, I noticed that today, or at least the day that you flew out of Egypt en route to the United States, was in fact April 20th, 2012. So congratulations and a celebration are in order. And once again, welcome to the United States. Let me just say one more thing and we'll jump into it. I'm certain that we have an extraordinary mix of individuals on our call today, Jewish, Christian, perhaps Muslim, right-wing, left-wing, politically, all interested in learning from a man who has lived at the center of things we read about and then feel that we can speak about with authority. Hate is not unique to where you come from, though it's a particular type of hate, I think you'll tell us. But today, help us understand as well, you and through you, better understand how to bring about change in the Arab world and frankly beyond. And I'm just going to start in chapter 7, where you say, life in Egypt can be maintained intact even with its deepest paradoxes. I loved American culture, food, movies, but that didn't stop me from going to the mosque every Friday to hear a sermon demonizing Americans. My father would work with Christian colleagues that cheer the news of torched churches. My mother would be appalled by our addiction to Hollywood action movies, but never bat an eye when we watch images of the dead torn up on TV with background songs of the victimhood about Palestine and the evil Israel. It somehow never made sense to me. And then at the end of that chapter, it's really the best chapter. They're all great, but you say, I slowly but surely knew that my obsession with Jews and infidels became stronger. And eventually, I had to carry my fascinations of heroism my own way. I decided to learn as much as I could about my Jewish enemies to assure their destruction. I immediately discovered the scarcity and unreliability of much of the resources existing in the Arab and Judaic world. I would have to learn it from them directly, therefore. I did not know then that my own obsession was a complete fabrication that would ironically become my escape to truth. Tell us about your escape to truth. What do you attribute your particular escape to?
First of all, thank you very much, Danny, for your wonderful introduction, and thank you very much for having me speaking to your community, and thank you everybody who tuned in to listen to us today. It's really hard to say. I think about this often, and I go backward to try to kind of understand how did my life unroll or play out in such very unexpected ways. But I can't get over the fact that my obsession with anti-Semitism, which was true obsession, that's for a big portion of, honestly, it continued with me throughout the years. But the things that I wanted to read, the things I wanted to watch, I was utterly obsessed with the issue. I mean, obsessed enough to really become fluent in Hebrew without ever setting a foot in Israel. That's how bad the obsession was. But I can't get over the fact that it is what helped me to think better about everything else. That obsession caused me to go into areas that I never imagined that I would go. I would go into history, literature, religious studies, trying to understand who the Jews are and what do they do and what do they say. And as I discovered the fact that this is not a small issue, that the Jewish historical tradition is one of the richest historical traditions in history. I mean, the people of the book, right? It's the book on which a big portion of human civilization and human history is established. So that means it's way deeper than I imagined it to be, and it resulted in me after learning how different the world is, actually turning my eyes back onto myself and then asking myself, well, who am I? And that inevitably led me to a complete transformation in the way that I saw myself, in the way that I saw my society, and the way that I saw my role in the world.
So we're going to jump around a little bit, but I mean, I think have a somewhat of a chronology, but I was very happy to read in your book in the end that you did reconnect and have reconnected with your mother and your sister Nora, and I wasn't sure, perhaps your younger brother. But how about the rest of your family? Have you been able to establish with any of your family a better understanding of how you see the world? And today, sort of 10 years roughly on, do they see things any differently in 2020, 2021?
That's a great question. So I actually was able to speak very recently to my father. It was a very kind of general, kind of distant conversation, not getting into any issues, but I'm glad that I was able to remake that connection. As for my brothers, my older brother, I haven't spoken to him. He's very religious, so he sees me as an apostate, something that's even worse than Jews, or so to speak. And my younger brother, he now has his own life. He has a family. His wife is about to give birth to their first child. But from my mom, what my mom told me, he feels that I betrayed them, that I chose other people over them. And it really hurts me to think that's why my family thinks about me, that I chose other people over them. But I understand why do they feel that. And I hope with time, gradually, as the world change around them, they start understanding it better. And I already can see that with my mother. As you know, the last year was a really historic year in Middle Eastern history. The Abraham Accords in itself is a historic event, but it also signifies an unbelievably urgent pivot in the political behavior of many Arab countries. And my mother talked to me about that. She told me, "Oh, Hussein, they are doing what you said that they should do."
Mm.
And that's kind of funny and ironic how Middle Eastern geopolitics can help fix the relationships between you and your family. Uh, but yeah, I believe that with time, because I utterly believe that the truth is inevitable. And it's just one way or the other it will happen. And people will see it. And gradually that hopefully will normalize my own situation, not just amongst my family, but amongst Egyptians and Arabs in general.
Um, so Hebrew, it's language that was your gateway or one of your gateways. And you seem to actually imply in the book that it was difficult to learn. Now, mostly I think because there really weren't any teachers that actually spoke Hebrew
Yeah.
that you were studying from, which is fascinating. Um, but I'm curious, didn't you find Hebrew and Arabic to be extremely similar and therefore easier to learn than, say, English was in your school days?
They are extremely similar. Yeah, the grammar is very similar. In that way, it was easy to learn, easier than English, I would say. For example, figuring out the grammar and the rules. But in terms of the actual live language, I mean, there's a difference between learning Hebrew as a dead language, which is unfortunately what Egyptian professors do in Egyptian universities. They teach Hebrew as a dead language. There's no conversational ability whatsoever,
Huh.
and there's no interest in Israel. And there's just been learning it as a live language, and that's what I was missing. And I had to talk to myself in the mirror all the time in order to get at that.
Fascinating. Um, so let me ask you, what does I think of you as a unique sort of a Muslim Zionist. Um, what does Zionism mean in your mind, in your words? I think I know what it means for many people on the call, but and is Zionism in some ways a universal longing? But let you talk and address that, and I'll follow up on that.
Uh, you're right. Zionism for me, it means something different and maybe something personal. First of all, Zionism means justice. It means justice and it means truth. What really happened, what really went down in our ancient, medieval, and modern history. And it means justice. That is, when I look at the story of Israel, I feel immensely happy to live in a world where that story can happen. It gives me a sense of there is redemption in the world. There is justice. I need not be hopeless. And honestly, that saved me a lot and helped me get over a lot of things. I actually meet a lot of people. I'm not a unicorn, so to speak. There are a lot of people who come to very similar conclusions that are from closed Muslim communities. And I see them when they get out, their life end up collapsing. And you're probably familiar with this. This happens to everybody who's trying to leave a closed society. There are stories from people who try, for example, leave the Hasidic community,
Yes.
Amish people. It's the same concept. It's a closed society, or it's of everything you know. If you decided to leave, it's difficult. And for me, as you know from the book, I was very many times close to that. And the story of Israel Zionism helped me, not because I'm Jewish, but because I can watch it happen, that there is redemption, there is hope. And that just helped me keep going in my life. And this is really what Zionism means to me. It's that in this world, no, there can be justice and there can be redemption.
Yeah, and change. I mean, I think we look back and we um, in our generations don't really fully appreciate what Japan was, pre World War II or what Germany certainly was like at that time. So dramatic change is
Right.
seemingly possible, but hard to arrive at without convulsion, maybe. So there was another language that you write about, that of heroes and superheroes.
Yeah.
And the U.S. and in the U.S. and frankly all over, we have our heroes and sports figures and celebrities and family members. Um, we also get that from the media, as did you. And it was fascinating when we spoke and when I read the book that you talk about superheroes, and it's very timely in today's media here
Right.
in the U.S. I mean, we even see Gal Gadot will be playing an Egyptian, I believe, right? So walk us through that theme, though, because it was part of your obsession.
Right. I think superhero stories and mythology in general. I mean, if we look at comic books and superheroes, it's kind of a modern day mythology that is not all that different from, let's say, the story of Gilgamesh, 5,000 years ago. Those stories endure because they are meaningful on a very deep psychological level. They are not just fantasies and entertainment for kids. And I actually learned that the Rav, Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, said, they say stories put you to sleep. I say stories wake you up. And I think that's really, really true. These tales, they mean something. The idea of the world out there, that you need to go on a journey, and through that journey fulfill some sort of success in helping the world coming better. I think that's a lot of young people get attached to these stories. And they got attached to these stories because I wanted to become a superhero. I wanted to interact with the world. I wanted to find my place in the world as helping the world. And by the way, I think this is actually one of the main problems that you will find in jihadist propaganda, let's say, including the Palestinian ones. I don't know if you're familiar with the entire Palestinian iconographic traditions of posters with a martyr and the picture of Al-Aqsa in the background, and just as glorification. This is exactly what's going on. There is a myth of a superhero that is being constructed. The kids walk the street on their way to school. They look up, they see that billboard or poster with that hero, and that becomes what you will become. But a superhero needs a villain. And you just, in order to fulfill that, you need to have that villain. And for me, when I was a teenager, I was a child, the Jewish served as that perfect villain. Unfortunately, the same that it did in so many other historical episodes, whether for the last century, really, or 70, 80 years in Arab modern history, where the Jew and Israel were the enemy and that villain par excellence, or even, during the rise of the German, what was called the German ideology, which coalesced later into German nationalism, where the Jews became that kind of opposite of the Aryan hero that needs to rise and fulfill his destiny. And that's unfortunately the huge downfall of this Manichaean superhero myth, which is, you'll find that the Jewish ways of telling story really are very different than that. So the story of Moses as a superhero, or Joseph, if you consider this a parallel, you will find that it's not the same story. It's not the same way of identification yourself against a bad other, but it's an identifying yourself through a commitment. And this is a very different way of constructing this self-image.
Interesting. And talk for a second about sort of the man on the street, Arab or Egyptian. I don't want to put everybody in sort of one camp, but what does he or she care about? What moves him or her? You were there. You are. What does the average Hussein care about?
The average Hussein cares about their immediate life. Going to school, making a living, succeeding, getting married, taking care of their family, just the absolutely normal and average concerns. But unfortunately, those concerns, as you know, in many areas of the Middle East, as you said, it's not possible really to talk about everybody in the same vein, but in many areas there are significant problems that hinders the ability of many young people to do that, whether economic problems, unemployment, poverty, security issues. I mean, security issues have just gotten worse and worse progressively, really, in the last decade. And then you have to look at options. You know, there are a lot of people who opt out for immigration, the waves of people who arrive at the gates of Europe, for example. Those are people who just want to exit. And there are people who just stay and try to make it. And there are people who just get frustrated and then they decide to deal with those problems. And this is when the trouble began, because then you have different explanations of the problems. What is stopping you from living your life normally? And there are different approaches to the solution. And so far, and all of those explanations were absolutely awful. I mean, my own impression from the modern Arab history that everyone was absolutely wrong, whether not just the Islamists. I mean, there is, I think, an undue attention, or not undue, but just there's an exclusivist attention on terrorism and Islamism. Arab secularists and Arab liberals are not that much better. That is my impression. Their own explanations and their own solutions are still terrible. And I think that is a problem. And I think this is actually what is hopeful today, that is going to change, that there is a new Arab political class, namely in the Arab Gulf. The leadership of the UAE is an example, that are actually willing to create a new narrative, new explanation, new solutions.
And I do want to come to that, but I want to stick with the topic of you for a minute as a teenager. Did you ever see yourself as a suicide bomber?
I actually think every young person must have thought about it, because you grew up, you see it on the TV. It's not like here. So you hear, you know, you're halfway across the world and you watch it in the news and something looks exotic. But for you, it's not exotic. You grow up, it's a guy that has a relevant name, let's say Muhammad or Ahmed, who does this in the name of things you understand very well, things that you pray for in the mosque. So I think every teenager, at least that period of time, which is the immediately after 9/11, when this phenomenon really took off, the second intifada was going on. So I remember, like, it was almost daily, every other day in the news, suicide bombing, suicide bombing, suicide. And even in Arabic, they didn't call it suicide bombings, they call it a martyrdom bombing, something of that sort. So there was also that positive connotation around it. So I think everybody considered it. And I remember sitting during the break of school with my friends. I was 13 or 14 at the time, talking actually about this and talking about what is the best way to do suicide bombings. And maybe you could have two bombers consecutively at the same spot and you get more people, things of that sort. So as kids, we were thinking about it, you know, how much that still the space for that to actually get into, be translated into action is a very long space and requires, intervention. But yeah, I definitely thought about it.
Was it easy to hate, or was it natural, sort of banal in a sense, to have a target to place blame on?
Yeah, it's very easy. I think actually it's normal to hate. I think we all hate. The United States experienced that intensely as of recently. There is intense, without getting into politics, but there's been intense political hatred on everybody's part in those last few years. And I think hopefully this gives Americans some insight about a phenomena that was hard for them to understand for a very long time. No, hatred, intense, passionate hatred is very, very possible. Not just very possible, but it also, if you talk just in terms of politics or change, it's actually very efficient. I mean, my life was really, the things that I've done in my life, even the things that I'm proud of, were originally motivated by hate. This is how much hatred can really motivate an individual. And it's a very strong motivation. And this is why a lot of political leaders historically really opt to, because it's one of the most amazing tools in the political toolbox. And this is what's been happening in the Middle East for a very long time. Those who are older may remember that in the 70s, for example, early 70s, most people didn't even know what is Shia and Sunni, right? Like nobody even heard about, okay, Sunnis and Shias. And all of a sudden, it's the biggest thing ever. Originally, it was about Iran. It was about politics. you have problems between Iran and the Arabs. Both parties, hatred was to go tool in their political toolbox. Well, we hate them because they're Sunni, and we hate them because they're Shia. So I think it's actually not just easy, but it's unfortunately people find it very useful to hate, and this is why people do it.
Hmm.
And the only thing that we can do is it's just to try to develop a sense of a strong moral foundation that can resist the temptation to hate.
Well said. Now, the early days of the internet had a big influence on you and helped you to get where you are today. We have a different internet today. Today, there's an
Right.
Arabic internet.
Right.
But you said some interesting things to me about the early days of the internet and the lack of Arab resources
Right.
online. Talk about that for a second.
Yeah. So when the internet first became a thing, in Egypt, it started to become big late 90s, early 2000s, 2004, I think, or even before that, we got high-speed internet. YouTube took off in 2007. And still at that beginning, there was not a lot of Arabic content on the web. Because still it was slow for people to catch on. People who were aware of the internet were usually very young people like myself. So we were just users. The content production was not really, didn't take off yet. So most of what existed on the internet was written in English. You had to know English in order to be technically savvy. And then the information that you were exposed to was very different from what you read. And I think that helped me because that meant that for the first time, there was that space that did not have a lot of the propaganda content that I was used to. And that bought me time, so to speak, because now it's not like that anymore. Now Arabic internet picked up. Al Jazeera, Egypt Plus, I'm sure you saw it. Those kind of people spend billions of dollars today on internet propaganda. But back then, thank God, it wasn't like that. So that bought me time to be able to read all of those things in English and Hebrew and understand them. Unfortunately, as you said, it's not the same today. I mean, if you go to the internet, it's still better than what used to be before the internet, because at least you have access to everything. But now you have to actively choose what I think, the more accurate content, and you have to actively make decisions. And not most people don't do that, and most people are targeted by propaganda and ads and so
Yeah,
on.
so I'm curious. I mean, it's a little frightening what you're saying because I guess my question is, do you think you might still have ended up where you are today with today's internet, or it sounds like you're saying it would have been much more difficult for you to find those sources that that weren't what you'd
Yeah.
already been taught.
Honestly, I still get emails from, it's hard to say. I get emails from young Egyptians all the time, way
Wonderful.
younger than me, early 20s. So we're talking about 10 years younger. And they are also coming to those conclusions, but also there is a different set of pressures today also at play that didn't exist before. For example, before 2011, political Islam for most of the Middle East was a theory. It was theoretical. Outside of, let's say the Palestinians and Hamas, for the vast majority of people who live in the Middle East, Muslim Brotherhood or Islamism as a political and social theory was pure theory. After the Arab Spring, people saw in practice how does that look like. So I also think that's adding a different element where people can actually see what would that look like, and there are a lot of people are kind of repelled or repulsed by it.
Disillusioned by that. Yeah, so perfect timing. So let's go back in time, 10
Yeah.
years, literally to Tahrir Square. There you are, and I'm sure in many ways it feels like both yesterday and also a world away. But what was your feeling in the moment? Was there sort of a euphoria at the time, hoping and expecting this to change things, or was it clear enough early on that Egypt, at least Egypt in particular, specifically, would be exchanging one deficient government for another?
No, I don't think in those moments there is much thinking, really. You're swept into the action. There is a moment of euphoria. there is some sort of a collectivist mysticism that just collectivist action bestows on everybody. Kind of you're mesmerized into the moment, and you just focus on those what seems like a morally righteous demand. So that was it. It was a very euphoric environment. There was not a lot of thinking. I remember some older people said, no, we need to wait. This is not going to work this way. But nobody really listened to them because the moment had already taken off, and there was no way to stop it. But I consider myself one of the early people who got disillusioned fairly quickly, especially in Egypt. I think I really got disillusioned with this in March, when the first constitutional referendum was offered, and then the main piece of kind of thing that people were fighting off: are you voting for Islam or against Islam? And I think that is a moment when I realized, okay, this is not going anywhere well.
Right. Interesting. So let's pick up on that a little bit, and I want to go a little more pan Arab if we can. What do you think there is, if I'm phrasing it right, I want to be respectful and politically correct and all that, in the nature of Arab society, and also how Arab countries have evolved over the last several hundred years?
Yeah.
Do you feel something lies in the religion and a distortion of Islam by fundamentalists? Is it economic and more 20th century political? There are other poor countries that don't hate and teach hate.
Right.
Morocco is a very interesting example.
Right.
There are very few Jews there, still a strong affinity. And Bernard Lewis and Edward Said argued over this, as have others, but can it also simply be both? Can it be both religion and economics? But talk to that for a minute.
That is the question, as you said.
Okay.
That is really, probably this question has been around for about 100 years, roughly, but it really became the central question following 1967, the Six-Day War. What is wrong? And Arabs and Muslims have been, every Arab and Muslim with a brain, that's been the question of their life. Every Arab or Muslim serious intellectual in the past 70 years. The crisis of Arabs, the crisis of Islam, which is, that in itself shows the beginning of the crisis, because between Arabs and Islam as categories, we're talking about roughly 1 billion people difference. So people can't even say, is it an Arab problem? Is it an Islamic problem? What is it? And I have to say, sadly, we are nowhere near an answer today than we were when we first started asking that question. And it's a really, really difficult question.
Yeah.
There is a lot of variety. And the Middle East scholar Albert Hourani said this. He said one of the biggest problems of the Middle East is just, it's a paradox, because there is a deep variety, but there's also a deep unity. I mean, they are the same, but they are different. And it's really hard to even try to catch that. What is it that's different? What is it that's the same? As you said, there are different countries. There's Morocco. There are the Arab Gulf. There's Egypt. There's Syria. There's Iraq. There's the Palestinians. And there are different historical elements that enter the development of those nations. And I think maybe it would be better. I don't think we can ask that question of what's wrong. I think we're just going to get nowhere. I think, as you said, we have to separate them into different elements. For example, Morocco, you'll find that Morocco a very different country than the rest of the region. And one of the main reasons for that Morocco was not part of the Ottoman Empire. That means that they were independent of the Ottoman for a very, very long time. That obviously affected them. You have traditional Arab monarchies, the Gulf and Saudi Arabia. I mean, they still even dress traditionally, who didn't really modernize early on. And then you have Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, the Palestinians, Egypt, countries that modernized fairly early on. And that created problems for both. So you have, let's say, bigger gender problems in the traditional monarchies, but you have more, I think, ideological problems in the countries that modernized early, because the countries that modernized early modernized during the era of the rise of very hyper-nationalist, racial, toxic European ideas. And a lot of this came in. And if anybody remembers Arab nationalism were just kind of a, a knockoff German nationalism, really. And that created problems. And then you will see problems with Egyptians, Palestinians, Syrians that you're not going to see with the Saudis. But at the same time, because Saudis did not modernize at all, you're going to see problems there that you're not going to see with the other societies. So it's really hard to really grasp what it is. But for me personally, what I really care about, what I think should be addressed before anything, is actually the social structure.
Mm-hmm.
So Islam, there's a difference, but religion does very different things, and this is why religions are strong. So religion, it's a faith. It creates a relationship between you and the deity. It gives you also some answers to very deeply troubling existential questions. It offers you a chance at redemption. It also deals with you psychologically. It also deals with you socially. It gives you a social fabric that you can interact in. Religions just do things very efficiently on multiple dimensions that not a single other ideology can do. So I think one of the main problems of Islam, and I think it's not the faith per se, but I think one of the main problems is in the social structure. That is the gender relations, the power structure in a society, the patriarchal structure of society. And I think any Arab or Muslim who cares about democracy needs to really address this more than anything, the issue of Islamic supremacy. So if you have a society of Muslims and non-Muslims, what is the power relations or the power structure between those? Because if you on principle endorse the idea that the relationship will always be asymmetric, that means that there will be somebody who's better than the other, this naturally preclude you from having democracy, period. And I think this is what people need to focus on in those societies.
Is it getting play? I know, look, you wrote that the Arab world is in a phase of being sort of stagnant intellectually, spiritually, and culturally. Now, that's not certainly always been the case.
Right.
In 2015, Ayaan Hirsi Ali she's written a number of books. One was called "A Heretic: Why Islam Needs a Reformation Now." Now, that was 2015. But what will it take, and what are those other strata in the Arab and Muslim world that are pushing for change? Are there too few for there to be any real connecting tissue, or is connective tissue being built? You say you get emails from young kids, and you're not the only one. There were people before you. There's
Right.
more.
There's more. Yeah. No, I actually think things are changing. That connective tissue is being built. And first of all, I have to mention that unfortunately, there is a real separation between what goes on in the Middle East and what goes on here, or our own conversations about it here. Not just in the public sphere, but I will tell you, I'm a graduate student at George Washington University. Even in the scholarship, even in academic sphere, I'm coming to the conclusion most of the Middle East scholars here, they actually have no connection to the Middle East. They don't know what goes on. They don't read what people write here. They read each other here. Like the scholars here, they read each other, but they don't read what people there are doing. So there are changes. I think there is a beginning of a major change in the Middle East. Israel is definitely a part of that change. Not just, it's becoming the litmus test of that change. That means that for a new block of Arabs, the question of Israel becoming a question of trustworthiness. That means a person's the trustworthiness of somebody's opinion is, do you accept Israel or not? And I think this is happening. It's a small circle now, but this small circle surprisingly has big power behind it. There are Arab ruling families who understood this. If their own power is to be stable, they need to completely alienate Islamic ideology and Arab nationalist ideology. The only thing that can alienate both of them together is accepting Israel, because that will leave no room for neither political Islam or Arab nationalism. And they are doing a lot of work. I mean, the Arab media is changing. It's going to be slow, but I think it's beginning to happen.
So let's skip over a few things for the moment and talk a little bit more then about this theme about what's going on politically. First of all, it's always been historically fascinating that it seems at times there's a more militant right-wing leader that will make peace rather than a more liberal leader. So I think of Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat making peace between Israel and Egypt, or Richard Nixon being the first to visit China. I'm sure there are people who will shout me down for this, and I'm certainly not a right-winger. But who do you see, if anyone, perhaps also breaking the mold and surprising, taking the next step with Israel? We've seen Emirati leaders. What do you see happening next?
Saudi Arabia. I think Saudi Arabia is in the works. I think it's a matter of time, but that will change everything. The big question really is the Palestinians, because currently the leadership that the Palestinians have they don't have what it takes to make peace with Israel, whether the Palestinian Authority or Hamas, obviously. That means that the Palestinians will have to wait till they get a new leadership. And this is a big question for the Palestinians, but it's very obvious that outside of Israel, other Arabs, they can't wait anymore, and they are understanding this. There is an urgency to change the regional arrangements right now because of Iran, number one, because of the domestic challenges posed by Islamism, Muslim Brotherhood, and jihadism, and so on. That's number two. And because the challenges that is posed by the economic conditions of the youth. Country like Egypt, 60% of the population is under 25 years in age. So you're talking about a region that is overwhelmingly young, overwhelmingly underdeveloped, overwhelmingly unstable. And this, if this is not stabilized now, this promises us a very troubling future on the short and long term. And there are a lot of rulers who understand this. So I think Saudi Arabia is definitely going to change a lot of this once they make peace with Israel, because they will also cut the religious aspect. They will alienate the religious aspect of the conflict, that it was supposed to be some sort of an Islamic cause because of because of Jerusalem. If the Saudis, because they are the guardians of the birthplace of Islam, the holy places of Islam, come to peace with Israel, that will ultimately alienate any religious claims towards free Palestine and all of that.
So it all comes back to Iran. One question about Saudi Arabia, and then I do want to get to Iran. Even if Saudi Arabia sort of moves toward where the Emirati are today, and like you said, there's a lot of talk and probably a lot of substance in that conversation, they're still dealing to some degree with their pre and post Khashoggi actions. It doesn't change who the government is. It just changes what motivates them vis-a-vis Iran, maybe. I mean, is this all about Iran and they're really not such nice guys running Saudi Arabia, but hey, if everybody hates Iran, that's maybe good for the West and the breakdown of fundamentalism?
Iran plays a significant role, but it's not the only one. I think in Western analysis, there is an overemphasis on the role Iran plays. I would claim that even if the Iranian threat did not exist today, more Arabs would be accepting Israel the way that we're seeing it. And this has to do with our understanding of the Israeli-Arab conflict in general. And they think a lot of the prevalent understandings of the Israeli-Arab conflict are, in my opinion, are flawed. The cause of Palestine, or the Palestinian cause, was never, it's real for the people who are involved in it directly, that is Israelis and the Arab populations that are living with them. But for the entire Middle East, it was never a real cause. It served various political functions. It served various social functions. one of the main functions of the Palestinian cause, that actually the main reason that Arab nationalism really put such emphasis on the Palestinian cause, that it was a tool of political modernization. That is, 100 years ago, nobody had a state or a national identity, right? I mean, I remember reading this book about this researcher going, and that wasn't even too long ago, maybe like 70 years ago, going to that rare village in Italy and asking the people there, he was doing research, asking them, what do you think of Italy? And they told him, Italy, we never heard of it. And then they asked him, what are you then? Well, the guy said, well, I'm a carpenter. He's a plumber. This was a situation of the populations of the Ottoman Empire in general, right? Like, yeah, ask you what you are. Well, I'm Jewish, I'm Muslim, I'm a Roman, Orthodox, whatever. But there were no national identities. There was no national political legitimacy for something called a modern state. And the Palestinian cause was a way to modernize those masses who most of them were illiterate. So get them riled up about a cause. This cause says that there's something you belong to called Arabs, and there is an invasion from those bad guys called Jews, and you have to be a part of it. And through that mass mobilization, you'll get people to actually be integrated into a modern state structure. This is just one example of the functions that the Palestinian cause has played. It played many other functions. I'll give maybe another example. I was reading very recently about the history of the rise of Islamic fundamentalism in Egypt in the 90s. And there were terrorist groups that the state were fighting. And it was really a low intensity war in Egypt at the time. Afterwards, the state, and that was in the 90s, the Egyptian state and these terrorists wanted to come to an agreement in order kind of a peace agreement between them. And then there was a declaration, almost an official document, that was issued by the Islamic terrorist groups to end the jihad against the Egyptian state. And in that declaration, they said that they understood that their former position was wrong. And one of the reasons is because their engagement in war against the state gave chance to those terrible Jews to conspire against Muslims and like destroy. And here you see the political function anti-Semitism played, that it helped facilitate a peace agreement between an Arab state and Islamic fundamentalism. And this is honestly what's Palestine, for most of the Middle East, what Palestine has been since the 1948. And thankfully, what's happening, a lot of those uses not just are becoming obsolete, but they are becoming counterproductive to a lot of those regimes. That means they are coming to bite them back. Because now, who's using Palestine? Iran is using Palestine, right? Mm-hmm. Who's using Palestine? The Muslim Brotherhood, the enemies of those regimes. And this is why you have, so it's not just about Iran, it's about ending an ideological weapon that is now being used against Arabs themselves.
Yeah, fascinating. So if you were advising Mahmoud Abbas, what would you tell him?
I would tell him actually what two of his former advisors just published in the Foreign Affairs. I'm sure he's not going to listen to it. He said, like, just accept what they call soft sovereignty, basically what they were offered before over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. I don't think he will, but I think this is the best option for the Palestinians right now. Mm-hmm. Sadly, I know for a fact it's not going to happen. There is, I think, in my opinion, there is a lot of uncertainty about the future feasibility of a Palestinian state. Which is not a good thing. I mean, because that was actually a good exit. If it was possible, that would be a really good exit out of this problem. But because of that behavior, I don't think in the future is going to remain feasible, which will create a larger problem, I think, for the Israelis. And I don't know how they are going to get out of it. But really, the best thing that Palestinians can hope for is that time does its work. And we know Mahmoud Abbas, he's 78, right. Maybe. Yeah. But that also leaves the question of Hamas. It's just, it's an unfortunate situation, but unless the Palestinians take matters into their own hands and try to produce a new and reasonable political leadership, I don't think it's possible really to do anything positive.
Right, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about the United States now. You've been here for enough years. and you certainly have opinions. Before I want to hit college campuses, because you're here under the auspices also of Stand With Us, but talk for a second about the politicians. We hear a number of people in Congress that are extremely pro-Israel, but there's a big population in the United States. No surprise that as the Arab population here in the US has grown and become educated, I didn't think they would all become card-carrying Zionists. But talk for a second about the nature of US politicians from Arab communities in the United States and their perspectives, and do they listen to you, these communities? Are you invited, frankly, to speak among Arab communities in Michigan and elsewhere?
It's difficult. It's not possible really to talk about American politics because Stand With Us is nonpartisan. I'll give general comments about the Arab communities. There's a problem with Arab communities in the United States that is, and it's a problem of organization, and it's the same problem that happened in the immediacy of the Arab Spring. That the people who organize are usually people who know how to organize, actually, who have the skills to organize, who have the funds, who have the resources, are not people with the best opinion. That doesn't mean that they represent the majority, but they are actually the only ones who have skills to actually make an organization and go say, we represent the Muslim voice or the Arab voice. And the same problem is happening in the United States. So if you go, for example, look at the statistics, how many Muslims attend prayers regularly, how many Muslims appear at the mosque regularly, how many Muslim women in America wear the hijab, you will find that there's an even split. I mean, there is a big number of Muslims that, just completely secular in their lives, but you wouldn't know that from Muslim civil rights, activists and Muslim politicians who want to present themselves as the exclusive kind of card holder of the Muslim voice or the Muslim representation, and so on and so forth. And politicians, that's what politicians need. And this is why now they are getting into politics, because they are becoming a voting bloc, unfortunately. But that really doesn't represent the entire reality. Actually, this is just a note. I'm not endorsing anybody. This is not just about politics, just a matter of fact. In the last presidential elections, Trump got more Muslim voices than the elections before that. That's an actual statistic. You can find it online. His Muslim vote numbers went up by double digits. And remember, that's the president the media scolded for 4 years about the Muslim ban, regardless of all of this. But what I want to say that the Muslims and Arabs in general are way more diverse as a group of people than they are perceived, not just by the media. This is not a blame, no, by their own politicians, by their own representatives. There are always politicians who want to represent that they represent something big and whole and cohesive called Arabs and Muslims. That's really not even true in the Middle East. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been seeing so many civil wars. And I think actually that is one of the main problems in the region, that there is no recognition of diversity. As for American politicians, I think as any politician, some politicians have moral stances and some politicians are pragmatic. And the truth is that, yeah, there is a gaining momentum for pro-Palestinian and anti-Israeli stances, not just among the Arab constituency, but also in the far left constituency. You're talking about very educated people that are becoming very, very anti-Israel. So that means that you can pick up, as a politician, you can pick up, a lot of votes endorsing those positions. And that's just a sad reality of politics, that people do calculations. So this is why I like, I live in DC. I talk to people all the time, and every time I talk to people on Congress and Capitol Hill here, I realize, I like what I do with Stand With Us. Politics sucks. I really don't know how we can move things through politics. It's education. It's getting as many people, because it's a democracy. It's getting as many people as possible to stand behind your cause.
Good. So let's talk about campuses. We have a few minutes. So you're speaking on a lot of campuses. How many campuses have you spoken on?
Oh, I stopped counting. A lot. Yeah.
Okay. A lot's a good number.
Yeah.
What's going on college campuses with respect to attitudes, toward Israel? Have you been received and welcomed by Muslim students? I know you're being welcomed by Jewish students.
Yeah.
I don't care about that subject. I think we want to hear about what's the reaction you're getting from Muslim students, and are people really, let's cut to the chase, are people approaching you after you speak?
Yeah, a lot actually.
That's what I want to know about. That's where the stuff happens.
Yeah, that's true. So Muslim students, I get the usual hecklers during the speech, but I also get those who wait for me till the end to talk to me personally about their own experiences and what they are going through. So as I said, that actually kind of touches back on what we just talked about. No, there is a mix of opinion. You have a lot of Muslims and Arabs who are growing here now. They have Jewish friends. They see the world differently, and they want to think differently about the world. So I do get. I think it's generally positive. I had incidences where people tried to cancel my event, where people tried to heckle me down from an event. This happened often, but also I get a lot of people wait for me till the end to talk to me. Hey, my parents are originally from Lebanon, from this. I hear this. I think you're right. I don't. So this actually happens, but I think there are a lot of challenges on campuses in general, especially big campuses. So I think actually small schools are mostly fine. I think the problem is in big schools, the big names. The problem is that it's the issue of Palestine, Israel, and anti-Semitism is becoming co-opted into a rising political, ideology of activism that espouses so many other diverse issues, which is actually weird because you're having this ideological basket with so many issues, as many as possible that you're throwing in, and you're closing a lot of people ideologically in that space. And it's happening now. It's not just student activism, it's also the faculty, school administrations, and a lot of students. I mean, if you're talking about a young student, you're a young student, those are people are in authority. There's an overwhelming, what seems to be, who knows, but what seems to be an overwhelming consensus on issues of social justice, that now the issue of Palestine, Israel is one of each. So I think a lot of students have deep questions. It's just you don't have the confidence, and I don't blame them because it looks threatening. It looks like authority. And this is what I do with Stand With Us. We go, we talk to them, we give them the tools, we try to empower them in order for them to voice their opinions. I'm going to be completely honest with you, Danny. I am becoming increasingly optimistic about the Middle East. I'm not lying. I go to, the media, I go to YouTube, I see what young people, okay, there is really, really a room for optimism, and I'm becoming increasingly pessimistic about the situation in the United States and on US campuses. I go to my own classes. I hear what people say. Sometimes I feel that the students' convictions are too strong that even if the professor wouldn't be able to push back, even if a professor wanted to. And I think it's alarming.
Ouch. That's I didn't know where you were going with that comment. That and then you hit the second half of that piece. That's a little frightening. So, all right, we have a couple of minutes here. Let me see if we can sneak some questions in. First of all, we have a lot of people who want to help you get in front of other Arab and Muslim communities. But one question, so about the Quran for a second. If Muslims and in Arab societies and even here rely on the Quran, is there enough in the Quran? I have never read the Quran, so pardon me, but is there enough in the Quran that can counterbalance? Is the teaching so still hatred infused, or is there enough in the Quran to create a more pragmatic, balanced, sort of open-armed approach? Or is that just really pie in the sky and never going to happen?
That's an excellent question. Now I'm gonna give you my personal opinion. This is not Stand With Us. Stand With Us doesn't talk about the Quran, but this is my personal opinion. That's something also I look into and I study a lot. So the Quran is a very different book than the Bible, whether the Tanakh or the New Testament. The Quran is actually a very short book. It's actually, I think it's in length, it's like third of the New Testament. This is how small the Quran is. And in nature, what it claims to be is very different than the Bible. That means that the Muslims believe that the Quran is a literal word of God. It was authored by the Almighty himself with no mediation. So it's not written by Moses through an inspiration from God. God told Moses to write this. No, it's actually God is the actual author. There is no in between. The message of the Quran itself, it actually has both. That means it has, and this is what makes the conversation in Muslim societies about terrorism is actually so difficult. And many times I wish people understood Arabic in order to understand the conversations going inside. That both sides are able to justify their positions from the Quran. That means a terrorist can 100% justify what he's doing through the Quran. And the moderate Muslim who's anti-terrorism can also 100% justify what he wants through the Quran. And both of them are 100% right. And this is sad. And this has to do with the nature of the Quran itself in terms of its own inner structure, cohesion. There are a lot of historical studies that are being done on the text, how it arose, and so on. But it comes down really, and this is how I see it, it comes down to a personal choice. So the Quran, I'm going to open it to you, and you have two pages. There's one page is telling you it's you against the world, and then the page right across of it telling you should live with everybody peacefully. So the Quran actually leaves it to you to choose in a way. And what happened that due to several reasons, we had an unfortunately huge moral failure coming out of the Middle East. And that moral failure was basically the combined effects of many individual moral failures. People who opened the Quran and they decided to go with the more violent message. I'm going to pose the question in another way, maybe people may understand it. All right, the Quran allows you, it doesn't say you should, allows you to marry 4 women, right? Let's say, a Muslim guy married, to his wife, and then he decided to take another wife. And his first wife is obviously very upset. It's not like Muslim women are happy when their husbands decide to marry a second wife. It's usually a big deal. But then that man decides, I'm going to take a second wife. And when his first wife really objects and her family objects, he says, well, the Quran allows me. Who should we blame here? Is it the Quranic text or the sexual greed of the man who basically is hiding behind the text, right? And that question I still don't understand. So a Muslim goes and kills, people in terrorism or whatever, a Muslim terrorist. Is the text to blame, or is it the criminal inside that terrorist that's hiding behind the text that is the primary? And to be completely honest, even me personally, I'm not able to 100% resolve that dilemma. Because I know for a fact the text has an effect. If the text wasn't there, the criminal would not have been able to hide behind the text. But at the same time, if the criminal intent wasn't there to begin with, the action wouldn't have happened at all.
Yeah, so I know we're running over a minute or two, but I'm going to blame the text just a bit, yet the text in the case I'm about to give you was written by a person. I'm going to recount the anecdote I shared with you when I was at a conference in Silicon Valley a few years ago, where I ended up coincidentally sitting next to an entrepreneur who had grown up in the Middle East and lived in Canada. And he grew up in Iran, and so we eventually made our way to discussing technology, Israel, etc. And he unsolicited shared with me that and I told you this, he asked me, do you know how we learn math in Iran?
Yeah.
I've not been able to confirm this for all of you on the call, but he said to me, I didn't know why he was asking me. I go, no, what do you mean? I thought he was going to be talking to me about some sort of, calculus or physics or something very deep about technology and innovation. He said, one Jew plus one dead Jew plus another dead Jew equals 2 dead Jews. And I was so taken aback. But when you talk about textbooks, and I read about what's in Palestinian textbooks and what I hear about Iranian textbooks and others, you mentioned Qatar, and I read about UNRWA, I think textbooks and what we teach, and you're a teacher now, does make a huge difference. And I think in the end, everything we've talked about in the last hour in 5 minutes is about education, but touch on that about what young kids are taught. And maybe from what you're saying, from the emails you're getting, from the YouTubes you're seeing, maybe, education will transcend the people who edit these
Yeah.
books and push beyond them. But go ahead.
No, I agree with you. When I say I'm not sure about the question, it's not that I'm exonerating the text, but I also don't want to let the individual get away with his moral failure, blaming the text. Well, the book told me to do it. So yeah, I'll blame the text, but I want the individual by the end of the day to face his own individual responsibility. The education, as you said, there are many problems with texts. I think the Quran, I mean, as the ultimate text, really in a lot of Muslim societies, is a problem. The texts that are built up on top of that are problems too. But yeah, I think people can transcend all of this, especially in a different age of information where everybody is carrying one of these now in their pockets. I think people can and will, especially if you have a lot of states now in the Middle East that are failing states. So if you think about the indoctrination, they can't even carry that because there is no Ministry of Education, there's no efficiency, there are no funds even to fund, proper schools where it can get the kids to indoctrinate them in. And I think that's actually, unfortunately, it's really sad, but in one way or the other, it may actually turn out to be better for, let's say, Syrian kids, Yemeni kids, who now don't have schools to go to. And I would actually corroborate that from my experience. In Egypt, I think there is a direct corroboration between how much time did you spend in higher education institutions in Egypt, or educational institutions in general, and the level of anti-Semitism you believe in. That means the more you attended educational institutions, the more anti-Semitic you are likely. Illiterate people, and this is just an ironic, but it's true, illiterate people will be significantly less anti-Semitic than a person who has a college degree in Egypt. So I think there are a lot of variables that are gonna change this. And as I said, I'm really hopeful about the future of the Middle East.
Well, that's a great closing statement. I can't think of a better one. I have hours more questions for you, so maybe we will have to do Hussein Volume 2, which I hope you would be willing to do. But this has been fantastic, fascinating. I'm thrilled that it was on April 20th, the anniversary of a very important day in your life, and I'm glad that the plane took you here. All we can do is hopefully get you in front of many more people to share your story, and frankly, more people where the Zionists are way outnumbered by the rest of the people in the room.
Thank you.
תודה רבה לך, נעים מאוד, ונעשה את זה עוד פעם.
יפה, סבבה. תודה רבה לכם. Thank you very much, everybody.
בבקשה. Thank you all. Oh, one last point. I'll be yelled at if I don't plug the upcoming events. Somewhere here I have something on upcoming. May 11th, we have Lieutenant Colonel Sarit Zahavi from Alma talking about Israel's security challenges on its northern border. Put that on your calendars. And on May 2nd, an actual physical drive-in. So for those of you not in New York, I'm sorry, although maybe it's on Zoom as well, but a drive-in concert, The Story of Israel in Song, at the JCC of Mid-Westchester in Scarsdale. Hope to see you there. Thank you all, and we'll see you soon.